Yes.
Awesome.
Oh, there goes Sharif.
And also remember, though, if he's not on, we cannot end this at the end either.
That's right. We will do our best. Now I see two Sharifs, sort of.
Yeah, he's probably trying to also log on his phone or something.
Right.
Hey, Jason and Lisa.
Hey, how you doing, guys? Good to see you all.
Hey,
Morning.
Jason.
Sharif is having power outage problems.
It happens.
So he doesn't have any lights in the background.
We're about to have a thunderstorm hit here in Austin. It's getting really dark outside.
Yeah, we've had windstorms all night here in Arizona.
Man, I think Alien Worlds is going to kill me one way or another.
Sorry. A power outage makes it so much more difficult. I mean, when the weather gets rough, that's the thing. But as long as you still have energy, then you have better answers. But when the power's out,
Right.
Well, our electrical company doesn't like to get sued in the summer for starting fires. So occasionally they just turn off everybody's electricity.
Well, that's a solution, I guess.
let's hope
We were without.
We said that. Well, David said that he was asked to host, and that he had sort of put it to the table that we'd all self-regulate to some extent.
Yes, I think that's the best way.
Oh, we have no problem carrying on. We just can't start it or end it. We've got
Or
plenty
sometimes
of
we
skilled-
can't. And we can't
plenty of
stop.
skilled moderators here. We can moderate ourselves. We can be moderate.
Yes, we can.
Sometimes.
As long as he can get us started, I guess. Get us streaming.
Is anybody aware of metaverse spaces that are focused on natural disasters, like a simulation or a training module or anything of that nature?
No, but it sounds like a great idea.
Well, I thought about that because Santa Fe Institute they're pretty data and emergency oriented, and they're pretty metaversal.
Okay.
So I don't know, they've set up a metaverse, but they have very interesting things. Things like taking multiple cameras and fusing those into 3D on the fly. It's pretty cool. And they can also project data over any surface, regardless of the shape. So they can actually take your screen and project it in the corner of your room, and it'll look normal.
I love it.
It'll measure the corner, and it'll compensate for that automatically.
And Jason, to answer your question, Interpol announced today they are setting up the first law enforcement metaverse.
Law enforcement.
Wow.
Yeah, and this is Interpol.
Well, how long before the first metaversal cop show comes out then?
Already in pre-production.
You are, and I've got the tagline. Jason, you are meta busted.
Okay, Sharif tells me that we are live now. So welcome everyone to today's episode of World Talent Economy Forum, where we're going to talk about the metaverse and education. And we have quite a number of wonderful speakers here today, and we'll let each introduce themselves as they go. And I'd like to start with David Smith. Would you like to start us off?
Sure. More than happy to do that. The topic today really is the metaverse technology in the education industry. And as you look at it, the metaverse has so many different applications, and we've talked about them many, many different times on these programs. But one of the most common denominators of all definitions of the metaverse is it's the next generation of the internet with a lot of new features such as 3D environments and the ability to create and really edit and get immersive in virtual worlds. And of course, keep in mind that the metaverse is a lot more than just education. And you even see companies like Facebook recognizing the big importance of the metaverse and changing their name to Meta. So you begin to see that. But many universities, many private institutions, many corporations are really researching and developing a platform based on for education based on the future of the metaverse technology, and they see many environments for it. Some of the environments I've seen in the metaverse, for example, have a traditional school type of layout turned into an education environment. Others are more authorized around a corporate type where you have your training room and then multiple breakout rooms around it to where your teams can stay in the metaverse and go in and do that. But one of the biggest impetus for moving more and more into the metaverse for training was actually COVID. And beginning to see those restrictions of saying, I cannot do traditional classroom-based training. How can I go do it in a way that has more of an incentive for employees and students to participate in a way where I can control the environment? And as what we really saw during COVID and the dismiss of classroom environments in education in K through 12, of classroom environments in corporate, you saw the negative features of the current education systems really become very apparent to all. And particularly things like social emotional learning and others totally missing during that time as we get there. And the premise of education in the metaverse is that the students can get a very close experience to real world learning, particularly by the 3D environments that we're creating. One of the examples I used in a prior broadcast is a AI-based company here in Austin, Texas, has created metaverse training materials, for example, for the military and for commercial aerospace and others, where they actually can create in a metaverse models of jet engines and use not only the 3D metaverse, but they can use AR, augmented reality, as part of that. And they can have technicians at far sprung airports that don't really do jet engines much be able to go and repair them by using the facilities in the metaverse where they are. And one of the most important applications, really, of the metaverse in the education industry is to reduce the cost of the training courses, to also make them equal to whoever's receiving it versus having people in a live classroom versus having people dial in remote using Zoom or something like this. And we're seeing that going more and more forward as it's there. And we're seeing a great increase, particularly with 5G and the looming 6G networking technology, to where the 3D nature of the metaverse can be exploited very easily and being pushed forward with it. So, David, I think that's enough for a quick intro.
Yeah, thanks, David. Well, keeping in line with the Davids, I think I'll go next and then we'll pass the baton around. So I wanted to come at education in the metaverse, maybe from a little bit from a historical perspective. Some years ago, after doing my initial technical training for the Air Force, I went out into the field to learn as a very inexperienced technician in radar electronics. And the first thing I had to do was not only do my work during the day, but I got these packet of books. And these books would work you through lessons that you would have to then submit through a unit training official that would go in and be graded and come back. And when you reached a certain level of being able to work through these workbooks, then you would have to go to the base education office and sit for a proctored test to show that you had learned something. So I bring that up because that's where we've started with remote learning. There wasn't anybody around to give me the structured test. I was working with other very skilled technicians that could give me a lot of hands-on and practical experience as I went into the field. But to get that additional educational experience, that was done with books, sending things through the mail, and then going and sitting in a physical place to take a test to prove that I'd really learned it and hadn't, cheated somehow going through these books. Some years later, pursuing a college education, I was a working adult and going to night classes and even taking some classes on weekends. And the college that I was going to provided, they had an education channel on the local cable network, and you could take television courses. So I took an astronomy course that way, which was really divine, that you could sit there and you could watch the show. And then there were assignments to send in that were remote. And then we did actually physically have to go into the college to do some of the hands-on lab work that went with the astronomy class. So that was definitely a step up from the books, but and a richer experience than the books, because the television was very engaging, I found, especially in something like astronomy. So that was pretty nice. Well, that progressed on. I'm a lifelong learner, and I'm still taking university classes today. And the university that I'm using for that, I'm doing this all remote. And they've become very sophisticated with online lectures that you can watch in person in real time, or you can watch them later recorded. Some of the instructors are very savvy with how to do this. And on top of that, then they have interactive materials online, and all your testing, everything is done online. There's no mail-in forms. There's no proctored tests. And they have a good way of adapting to that. And I've been doing this prior to the pandemic that David Smith had talked about. So when the pandemic came, this just continued on as usual. Now, this particular university, like many, also has brick and mortar places, and they pushed people into the virtual environment and did some other workarounds, and they were easier to do that with. The company that I was working with at the time had been, I work in IT, had been not wanting to spend additional money on brick and mortar facilities, and had been pushing people into virtual environments before the pandemic. And they were much more pandemic resilience because all they had to do was build out existing infrastructure when the pandemic hit to be able to have more people that were able to work at home. Contrast that to some of what David Smith talked about as far as what happened in elementary schools and high schools that were trying to adapt in the pandemic. That was, they hadn't really spent the time on infrastructure or training of the teachers prior to the pandemic. And this really showed us where education had lagged in this area as far as service delivery was concerned. I bring this up because I think this leads us into the next phases. There's a lot of talk about the metaverse. And of course, today's topic is the metaverse and education. So how do we bring these together? Hopefully, the history that we have as far as education delivery is concerned can teach us some things. The pandemic certainly has taught us some things, but we have to be able to get the buy-in of individuals to be able to do this. I mean, there was buy-in at the university level for people to try various alternative ways of having their education provided, and that experience and those experiences have gotten richer and richer. And I think that's the promise of the metaverse. But we have to look at things like investment, because consumer investment is going to be an important aspect of this, because we found that lack of computers in certain households made it very difficult to be able to do remote learning during the pandemic. That consumer investment in in augmented reality or virtual reality will be necessary to be able to apply that in the metaverse. So what's that look like? Apple is betting heavily on augmented reality from what I can see as a stepping stone into the metaverse. And I think they have the right idea. And we're starting to see some products coming into a reasonable price range, $300, $400, $500 for augmented reality glasses that maybe some leading adopters will do. And they look less geekish than the previous. And they certainly look much less geekish than what we see, for headsets that we would have for virtual reality today. So these all have to improve too. So we've got a timeline of improvements in the commercial sector, the consumer sector. It seems like last adopters many times happen to be government. And in the United States, government is the primary funder for education. So we have to look at that. The one thing that I think that gives me some hope is I remember back in the 1980s as personal computers were starting to get a foothold, and then they really took off in the 90s. But there were some schools that were already putting in computer labs, even very, very early on. So I hope to see that sort of thing replicate itself as we move into augmented reality and virtual reality worlds. What will it look like when we get done? Well, I also remember back to the 80s and 90s thinking about what future computers were going to look like in the home. And we saw lots of movies and so forth that told us what the future was going to look like. And pretty much they were all wrong. And pretty much my ideas were all wrong. So we've got some pretty grand ideas, at least I do, what the metaverse is going to look like and maybe how it might be used in education. And they're probably all wrong too. So with that, I'll pass the baton. And Eric, perhaps you would like to go next.
Well, the two challenges in talking about education is, are we talking about how do we educate people, or how do we talk about educating people to operate, run, and take advantage of the metaverse? So there's two things to think about: is traditional education and how do we do education. The biggest challenge with a new tool or new technology is everybody just tries to say, oh, let's use it like we've always used it. I mean, just imagine a phone. Well, a phone is just that thing. It's just like a regular phone you move around. But tactically, we don't use phones like that. We schedule appointments. We get together. If you're using a phone like we always used a phone, you're not really getting any kind of competitive advantage. And that's true with new tools. I've seen this over and over where it's like, well, how can I just do what I've always done with this new thing? And the metaverse isn't like that. Thinking that way is different. So if you look at education, the big thing is learning management systems, which is how do we collect and organize information? If you look at Blackboard or Moodle or half a dozen, they're pretty much the same. They're built for teachers to store content and keep track of student progress. And in doing that, you've got lesson plans and you've got tracking and you've gone classrooms. And so the first thing people do at the metaverse is say, how can we duplicate these things? How can we duplicate the classroom? Oh, we could make it 3D. Oh, we could make it more interactive. Well, how do we do this engagement that we used to do in the classroom? Oh, we'll cut chat rooms and forums and posting and learning engagements. And so most of the work I've seen is on that. On the other hand, if you look at all the education investment, there's a ton of venture capital going to say, how can we duplicate all this stuff online? It's not really thinking very metaversal. It's just thinking, how can we take what we're doing right now, not how we can do it differently, but let's take the real key of education. Is it really about collecting and organizing all the information for you so you can go and say, oh, I know a lot? Not really. I mean, when the 2000s came, some of us started running these events where we would solve big problems. For example, a lot of more emergency management problems. And we would actually say, what system are people really using today? And on whatever system that was, sometimes they were defense networks, sometimes they were commercial networks, we would actually build that environment. We did one for avian flu. And we actually built San Diego with flus and hospitals and moving pieces. We even had autonomous agents in there, computer things that would act like people and do things. And we would start with a problem saying, well, what are really we trying to, what decisions do we need to make and execute? We would get subject matter experts, technology providers and developers in there, and we would put them in a cycle and we would start solving problems. They would come up with problems, they would solve them. And so we even had 3D representations and 2D. We had them on phones, we had projectors and touch screens. We did this like 17 times, and this was, over a decade ago. But the key is, the idea is, the subject matter experts were learning, the technology providers were using, the developers were learning, and everybody was getting educated in a different way. And so what they walked away with was relationships and a portfolio of problems they solved together. They could say, look, we know how to solve these problems that 2 weeks ago nobody even thought of solving. So if you look at this idea of how do we get people with common interests to find and collect each other, how do we get them to move into collecting information, analyze information, data analysis, problem solving, and then how do we actually get those solutions out? And here's the thing that this our metaverse equivalent did, is it allowed us to actually test this stuff in real time in front of people and get tons of feedback. We would do this at events that had 5,000 to 10,000 people show up, and we would have hundreds of people come back and ask questions, say, how about this? And people, oh, good idea. Let's put that in there. So it wasn't one teacher who kind of knew stuff compiling the information saying, oh, you go research some stuff you're around and share it. That's very narrow thinking. And I think the metaverse is about getting people connected. And I think Lisa will probably have some interesting things to say about this community experience design. How do you design? What we basically did was design an engagement between subject matter experts who had problems, developers, and technology providers. And we created that engagement to deliver all this stuff. And then we captured it and we briefed it, and people walked away with some tools in there. So I think this idea of teaching people how to connect people on the metaverse, teaching people how to help them share and come up with real concrete things and capture them, then how to take those things. The part we were kind of missing there is that we did work on at the end is, how do you then turn that into something that's real and grows? How do you take this thing that you learn into something that maybe people start using right away or tomorrow or next year or next week? So I guess my big thing is number one is, we need to stop thinking about the metaverse as how do we duplicate what we're doing now, although we're going to need to do a lot of that, and number for accreditation, things like that. But the other thing is, how are we going to teach people to do that?
Yeah, thank you, Eric. Lisa, would you like to follow up on that?
Yeah, I think that's a great point about how are we going to teach people, because it's really, to me, not even the teaching, but the experiencing and sharing that experience with other people. So what I've found has worked really well is having people together in a setting like this, or, on a Zoom call, not live necessarily with the world, but talking about whatever the topic of the day is. I call it workshops. I've been working on a beta of workshop.games to invite people in to just do that intentionally. And that's, what we've done in a lot of the games that we've created is gather for different topics or different areas of interest and alignment, and brainstorm together, share information together. And it feels critical, like it feels essential to have the community support. Like there's so many things we wouldn't necessarily know to do or know about or to avoid, right? Without that community input. So it feels like that gathering, like there's nobody who really knows. Like someone might know how to mint NFTs, or someone might know how to make a game path or use Unity software, whatever, but that's not really what it's about. It's about the gathering and the interaction, and you have to actually show up for that. And so how do you show up? You show up with groups of other people and you think together, and pretty quickly you see, or at least I'll speak for myself, I've become very humbled very quickly on a regular basis as I think about what other people are thinking about that I haven't thought about, and that directly impacts me potentially. So I think that's very important. The gathering, sharing of information, and the changing of perspective from thinking, you know, I'm becoming certified and educated. Not that certification is bad, but like to think like I'm going to become the expert and then I'm going to train someone else to be that expert might be a thing of the past, maybe with mechanical things, obviously, or, you know, safety type things, but for creating and innovating in new ways and new concepts, a lot of which are in our imagination and need to be designed, you know, more akin to community management and marketing and such, right? Design, you know, like a path design, really. I think that's where we're going to need to be, and that's a more collaborative type of learning together at this point.
Wonderful. Thank you. Jason?
Thanks. I mean, building on all of that, I agree with the comments shared largely, and that what I would build on is just that education is valuable when shared, and that one of the best ways I can benefit myself is to be surrounded by people who are better educated, marginally, right? If there's like something that I wish that they knew, something that I wish that they understood, or something like that, it actually improves my quality of life, and that it rationally makes sense for a person to proliferate their own knowledge amongst their community, amongst their neighborhood, for their own benefit, not just about status, not just about being paid to be a teacher, but like actually because the whole society and the markets and everything about that, the groups and the subgroups work better when people are better educated. And like the translated etymology of education, it translates to showing the way out. And Eric was alluding to solving problems, that there's a pragmatism to this, and that understanding your way to achieve your goals, to get past your problems, to solve problems generally, to understand existence as it is. That's what education is. It's not a list. It's not a list of facts that you need to memorize, right? It's a skill that you have about solving things, and that the element of the education systems in the world that are of disservice to it are the ones that actually trap people, where the educational institution or something about the educational process becomes like a trap or a dependency. And of course that's its antithesis, because you're not showing people the way out if you're providing a dependency. And I think that the metaverse just needs to be open. It just needs to be open, and that it needs to understand its purpose, and that the metaverse is the sphere of ideas and knowledge and information. And it's accelerating, obviously, and it's to our benefit if used wisely. To our tremendous benefit if used wisely. And so there's a little more to this. I want to share a story about Vitalik Buterin, the co-founder of Ethereum, famous in crypto, right? Everyone knows Vitalik Buterin. He's a hero in a way. In his own right, he is, right? He's deserved his respect. And though nobody's perfect, right? We're all a little bit wrong here, but not about the same things. So take the best from each of us, and then you'll have a good answer. But Anthony D'Iorio was a co-founder of Ethereum, a lawyer, right, by profession. And he described Vitalik Buterin as a very under-socialized kid at the meetup. When they were developing it, when the idea was fresh, when they were first conceptualizing Ethereum and launching it, there were difficulties because social skills are learned skills, and that school is part of that. The ordeals of school include how to navigate and solve the problems of social ordeal. And you know, like if our only problem was a technological hurdle, we would have solved it maybe 100 years ago. the truth is most of our difficulties in life and reality have to do with other people and being stubborn. And nothing but. And the metaverse, if that can loosen that up and provide a little extra wiggle room for the information to work so that everybody can understand things similarly to each other, then we can get past some of those things. And the amount of relief that's available in that is it's an invisible abstract, but I can tell you it will be overwhelming. It will wash over if some of these conflicts can just resolve due to matching understandings.
Thank you, Jason. Stephen?
Yeah, thank you. So I'll come at this from a little bit different perspective, historical, kind of like David Shoemaker mentioned, because there is an existing group of people who are poised to be early adopters of the metaverse because they have already adopted every single technological advance in education. And they work off of shared experiences. They work off of building community together, and they work off of educating one another. The educators educate one another, and the educators are educating the kids, and the kids are educating each other. And that's homeschool. And it gets a bad rap sometimes because, you know, people homeschool for a whole bunch of reasons. The reasons that are most prevalent in the media, I would say, are either political or religious reasons. I've been homeschooling with my wife. I've got to give her the most of the credit because I'm the school administrator. I'm the principal. So when things go south, they come to me. But so she plans everything else out. But we've been doing this for about 15 years. And every step of the way, there's technology out there. And we talk to other parents, we talk to homeschool groups and find out, hey, what's the best thing? Here's what my kid is into. This is their learning style. What's a good fit for them? And there will always be great answers. You know, before YouTube, there were DVD sets that would be circulated around, things like that. Great teaching courses. I have to say that my son actually learned cosmology and astronomy he was in 8th grade, 7th and 8th grade, and he was learning from a Berkeley professor. And that was his science for the year. I mean, who else gets that? What other community gets that? So, and then as things went on, you know, you have more and more online thing. Khan Academy is amazing. It's this treasure trove of math that's taught by an expert in not just in math, but in how to teach math and how to break it down and be simple and digestible. And one of the coolest things to us is that in this style of education, where you have early adopters of this kind of technology, you position yourself to learn from the best. So the best teachers, the best scientists, the best presenters are presenting the material, cutting edge material. So it's a lot of times we're learning things that are have just been discovered in the last few months. And the traditional school system doesn't really get that because they have textbooks and they're teaching 5 to 10 years in the past. And in this environment, we're learning cutting edge, bleeding edge things, you know, watching SpaceX rocket launches. Well, not just watching them, going to them. Opportunities like that. And then the types of classes that you get to attend. My son actually attended a cell division class with a scientist that was demonstrating how cell division worked. It's something that you really wouldn't get. I mean, you get a little bit of it in a classroom, but not like that. And then there's always the bad rap about the socialization aspect. And just to debunk that really quick, one of my friends who homeschooled home educated their son all the way from when he was little to grown up, he was on a little league baseball team that won the national championship. They were the national champions, and it was all homeschoolers. So there's plenty of opportunities to socialize in that. But I'm excited because whatever this next technology is, however the metaverse plays out, as AR technology gets cheaper and more affordable, some of the first adopters of that are going to be this home educator community. They're going to grab onto this stuff, and if they can find some professor someplace who's, you know, letting you use AR and disassembling a body and showing you where all the body parts are, I mean, you're going to have the next slew of doctors coming from this group. And the I know the public education system gets a bad rap a lot, and I feel for them, but they've always kind of been in the back, several years behind, trying to catch up. And I love what Eric pointed out, is that about how they're teaching and how learning happens, because here's my motivation for home education. It's not political, it's not religious, although there are benefits in there. The biggest is that the educational system is based off of the Industrial Revolution to produce workers in factories. And that's not what we need. And so as this starts being adopted in our home educator community, and I hope in the public school systems and secondary school systems, that they're not just trying to shoehorn in education for factory workers into some AR space or into some metaversal space. I hope they look at this and say, wait a minute, what can we do with this? We can fast track people to become doctors, or, you know, automate systems and come up with new technologies and things that just blow the lid off of what we've been doing. So our next scientists, our next innovators, I think, are going to come out of this move if it's done right. I dare say that it'll be spearheaded by home educators, because a lot of times in that community, you have some of the most creative people, you know, around. I think my kids are pretty creative. One thing, and I'll leave this as the last comment, but in our community, of the home educators, when they're graduating high school, I would say about 50% of them already have their associate's degree. Like, that's how far advanced they are, devouring information, not just general ed stuff, but whatever they're passionate about. So they've already been digging into physics and all these other things and using as many online tools as they can get to learn this stuff. So I'm excited to see where the metaverse takes that learning to.
What an excellent discussion we're having this morning. Let's start our second round with David Smith. I'm interested to hear what you have to say.
Well, actually, I love what Stephen said, because I homeschool my son as well. And when we did his graduation ceremony, there were over 350 kids walking across the stage. So the myth that it's only one student to a parent is kind of off when you get it. And we did great jobs of actually having parents come and teach different elements to small groups. But, you know, as you look what we're here with the metaverse, we're going to see, as Stephen said, a big impact in that audience as well. You're going to see others. One of the companies in my holding company, a company called Universal Tutor, it is a synthesized metaverse 3D environment that can be either in a full metaverse, or it can just be the 3D conversational AI avatars being used for the places where the hardware is not up to speed, to be able to actually fully participate in the metaverse. That's going to be one of the challenges we see as we see the metaverse being broadly applied across education, is how do we get the appropriate hardware? How do we get the appropriate displays? How do we get the appropriate augmented devices, being it, for example, an AR headset, or a more immersive environment, or haptic things where we can use our hands and things in the metaverse and have it sensed and used. And that is where you need to go to take really full advantage of the metaverse. And if you look at where the advantages, I think, are going to be in the metaverse, it's going to be very important. I mean, if you look at last 2021, there was over $20 billion spent in advancing education technology. And we're seeing more and more of that applied towards the metaverse. But, you know, some of the great places where you see the potential to disrupt traditional education by what we're going to do in the metaverse is how do we transition the content and the environment? You know, again, as I said before, the pandemic was a great way to shift the transition to a hybrid education environment. And we're seeing it moving even more over into the digital environment and with the metaverse to a fully immersive one. How do we personalize and match the student's pace? How do we match the students' care abouts, their disabilities or other things? Metaverse, again, can do that. How do we leverage this new technology? You know, Stephen mentioned Khan Academy. There's another one called Roblox who has been doing it. How do we go from lecturing to gamification? We all know from our personal experience that gamification tends to get us more involved, more active, and retention goes up. And gamification in the metaverse is a great way to do it. The other place I'm very excited about the metaverse, as opposed to traditional distance learning, which you sure can do part of this with traditional learning, but how do I really go and look through and say, how can I get the best teachers? How can I get the best examples? How can I begin to put the things together to reach the greatest number of students possible? And how can I put it in a way where I can close the gap between what the educational supply is and demand for students? Now, what are some of the challenges I think we're going to see there? One of them is just like in traditional in-person education, you see problems with the digital divide, you see problems with generational divides, and how are those going to be solved? And we still need to work that one through the metaverse. How do we redesign the education environments? Many of the early attempts in the metaverse mainly focused on replicating the physical infrastructure into the digital environment. One that I think we're going to struggle with, and I've seen it already tremendously, is how do we transform the role of the student and the teacher? Homeschooling helped with that a lot as we see it, but in the metaverse, it's going to really take off even more. One of the challenges we saw with distance learning during the pandemic is how do we tackle assessments? How do we tackle monitoring challenges? How do we know that the work being done is the students' work and not others? I have seen in some of the colleges and some of the high schools where I've sometimes lectured, they had students who would record a video of them sitting at their desks, moving their hands, doing things, and then play that in their little screen so that the people teaching thought they were online. Well, we're going to see the same thing in the metaverse too. And finally, the metaverse has to look at what are the standards that are going to evolve there. Standards from the technologies, the software, the privacy, interoperability. Is it blockchains? Is it going to have NFTs? How do we protect the privacy, particularly in K through 12? In the United States, there's something called the Protection of the Minor Act. Well, that's going to be really hard to implement in some of the metaverses the way they're being designed today. So fantastic opportunities, but there's also still roadblocks and challenges we have to overcome as we're moving forward into deploying this globally. And the metaverse has the capability to take quality content and deploy globally. So David, I hope that's what you wanted.
Even more than what I wanted. Thank you so much. Great group of discussion this morning. For my turn, I want to take a look at what I think is a pivotal issue in all of this. We've talked about a number of things that are very important, But as I look at technology and see the exponential increase in how technology is coming at us, I think responsiveness is also another key factor here. I liked what Stephen was saying about how responsive homeschoolers are as far as being able to adapt in that environment. I've taught in public and private schools both, and I found that the private schools that I taught in were much more responsive than the public schools, because many of these were the schools that I were teaching in were 2-year colleges, like akin to like a community college, which I've also taught in, that were looking at teaching skills for people to go out and work with an employer. So they had employer councils and so forth that provided feedback and says, this is the kind of people that we need today, and next year and the following year and the following year after that, this is how we see it changing, and we need people developed for this. So that created a level of responsiveness that, yes, there was responsiveness in the public school systems that I talked to too, but it moved at a slower rate and didn't seem to have quite the direct input. I see the metaverse as being able to take this and move this even quicker, hopefully by melding employers, but not only employers, but societal needs that need to be taught as well. Someone talked about social skills, and how do we do those? What's our measure of feedback? And I think this interaction that we would see in the metaverse might help with that considerably. But how do we get there? So homeschooling is great. Private schools are great. Public schools have their place. David brought out the fact about talking about how gamification has really helped. And what I see is that my kids and their kids were more and more obsessed, and I use that word purposely, obsessed with video games. Okay. So I look back at my younger age and look at what was I obsessed with, and that's what I ended up doing in my adult life, because that's where I wanted to put my attention. What I was obsessed with is where I spent time that people didn't have to tell me that I needed to go learn about. I would spend my own time learning about that and seek things out. So that created a very rich environment. So video games, gamification, certainly it greatly increases student engagement, gives them a richer experience. But how do we get that to them? And one of the topics that people hear me talk about a lot is innovation and entrepreneurship. And I clearly think that there are many avenues for exactly that in this area as we move forth. The metaverse is wide open. I've already said that whatever predictions I have about it will probably be wrong and probably be laughable in 5 or 10 years. But those that engage and follow the trends and follow what works will not only create a good business environment for themselves, but provide a great service as they move forward. So the entrepreneurial aspect of the metaverse in education, I don't think can be understated. And I'll leave it with that on that high energy mark, because I've got a lot of high energy behind it myself. Eric, over to you.
So the big thing to think about is not what a school is, because when we talk about education, we always talk about schools, but what do we want? And I think everybody here brought up some interesting patterns. Jason brought up the idea is it shouldn't be a trap. It shouldn't be this closed thing that's limited in resources. The other thing is Stephen talked about all these relationships that his students had. And I think number one, it should be a place to build relationships. I mean, the biggest thing is if I'm interested in human trafficking, I should be connecting with the most talented people that I can about human. If I'm interested in robotics, if I'm interested in cell division and biology. So it should be those places to hook people up with the relationships that are most valuable. So how do you maximize those relations? Second thing, it should be about problem solving, because really education at its core is all about making a difference. When we look at it, why are we getting educated? So you can make a difference somewhere. Why wait? Let's start making a difference. Let's look at the art of problem solving and get experience with people solving problems. Like I learned from a lot of people here. I know from Lisa, I just watch her do things. Oh yeah, I could do that. There's a problem I could solve. So you learn problem solving, and I know Lisa and I've spent some time, and I've learned from that. She's learned some stuff too, just by getting together and watching each other solve problems. Go, I never thought of solving problems that way. So I should walk out with a portfolio of problem solving by doing it and watching people solve problems and go, oh, so that's how you do cell division, and oh, how do that. So it should be problem solving. But the big thing is there should be a pipeline into taking that passion and turning it into making a difference, even if it's just for fun or art, those things. So we look at that idea of relationship building, problem solving, and making things real. Then you have to look at universities and schools differently, because they're not closed environments. What they should be is centers of excellence, and they should be that center place. Why do you go to this school? They really know about this thing or these things, and their job is not to be the sole, we have all the information, we have all the smart people. They should be, no, a new smart person comes in, we're going to grab them and put them in this as fast as we can. So then the problem becomes, well, how do you fund them? Well, maybe they get grants, maybe they get memberships or things for people interested in that. But also, if they're making a difference, maybe that's where you make some money. Is the school figured this out cheaper, faster because of synergy, and now this is something you can buy or use, and maybe the people who came up with that get a royalty. So maybe you actually, if you're good, maybe you get paid to be part of that school because you're coming up with things. And it doesn't have to be just science. It can be entertainment. Why do we go? Because that group of people is entertaining, and they've got channels that they're launching just to have these discussions. Like, think about it this way. We are not a university here, but why do I show up on Metaversal Mondays here? Because I learned something, and this is a fun conversation. This is not a school, but I'm learning stuff every week, and that's why we're here. So I think the big thing is, how do you rethink that? But you got to give these people a funding source to do that. And the funding source right now is people pay for a degree, you lock them in, you keep them there for a certain amount of time, and that's what you pay for. And the other thing to think about is the overhead. Even if you want to create a small school, okay, so let's say, how much are you going to pay each person in there? Let's say you cheap, $30K. Let's say $100K. Let's say more. But let's just say you're paying $50K for every person there. So if you have a staff of 10, what's your budget like? Whoa. Whoa, 10 people. Okay, and then you want a learning management system. How much are you paying? Some of those things can cost $1 million. So now you've got, $1 million for software. You've got that, and then you want to hire people just to run it. Now you've got all the professors. You need to pay them. It's incredibly expensive to run even the smallest university and have a presence. So if we can reduce those costs so that universities, or what if every university pitched in, or what if every center of excellence pitched in for the infrastructure and said, let's do the infrastructure at cost for all these centers of excellence. Now let's figure out how we make money. Let's make it so people who participate, it starts cheap. Then maybe it goes free for them as they get more experience. Maybe even they get paid. Maybe they want to hang out and be part of this center of excellence forever because we take advantage of their growth too. So different take on what we're doing and why.
Oh, wonderful. Lisa?
At the risk of breaking the format, first, I just want to go back to something Eric said so he can confirm it. When he said, if you're interested in human trafficking, he meant the prevention of it, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Good,
solving problems, doing good things. But I mean, there's a bunch of people that are passionate about everything from stopping human trafficking to helping survivors of torture to people of all types empowerment. Yeah, that's what I mean, is you should be able to connect with those people that can help you make a positive difference.
Yes, I've been in several chats lately where that's been a topic of conversation. And I know the communities are working very hard to ensure that we do whatever we can to make sure that gameplay resources are not going to things like that as much as possible. So it is definitely a topic of conversation. So I just wanted to address that. But also, what you're touching on is the nature of community, right? And communities more specifically based on interest, affiliation, types of creations, characters, games, what have you. And I do believe that the friendships and the relationships are everything. And that's true in traditional education with teachers and students and colleagues and mentors, graduate students, different levels. But it really is about the people. And that was true in the case of the homeschooling, right? That's true in the case of groups getting together, universities, et cetera. I actually worked at a university for 5.5 years at the Alumni Association. And the true value of the degree was really in the alumni and the affiliations that were gained and all the resources because of that, whether it's getting jobs or networking, meeting people for various reasons, or trying to get things done. And I witnessed those people essentially rule the world eventually by that, which is probably a whole nother show. But it makes a really big difference. It makes a huge difference in people's lives and collectively in our lives when people come together. When people come together, I'm actually seeing this right now because the Alien Worlds Planets just launched the game. It's the third game of Alien Worlds where people can run for office and choose what to do with the resources. And very quickly, we're educating each other on everything we can figure out, right? Because it's kind of like, a blank slate. And if you want to see how fast someone can be educated, just have a pool of resources that they can go after, and they'll start teaching each other real fast. So, but it's like, urgency creates that need. And historically, the urgency has been creating resources to live, right? And so now there's the opportunity, if we educate each other, we actually can think together and make new, better ways to do things, which is somewhat unprecedented, or certainly recently, except in, specific cases or industries and stuff, but sort of globally to reinvent how humanity is living. We have that opportunity now. And that's the kind of thing where we're going to have to collaborate, talk, think, brainstorm together. The education is the process of that more than the content at this point. I mean, they're not traditional. So, like medicine is security. There's some things that are very specific, but when we're talking about the metaverse and the structure of it and how we're all going to interact together, that I think that kind of an education is going to have to be built together. I may be being redundant saying this every time.
Jason?
Not at all. No, it's been flowing right along. I think what I would add right now is just that, well, just as a point of one, I think I want to go to the answer that I had prepared for what I thought was the topic, which is, what does the metaverse need the most? And that, I think what it needs the most is to define its baseline. So there's a story of how cars were environmentally preferable to horses because per mile, right? Per mile, per kilometer, per unit of distance of a mode of transportation, a horse makes more mess. Let's just say it that way. Makes more mess, relatively speaking, than the car does per the same distance. But cars turned into more of a pollution problem than horses, even though they're cleaner per kilometer or mile, because people can drive hundreds or thousands of kilometers without needing to stop. They saturate the capability, right? Just as water fills its container or gas fills its container, that the metaverse is a little misunderstood. Everyone has their own understanding, loosely speaking, of where's the baseline on this thing? What do we call it at the start? Because if it is information, if the metaverse is the ecosystem of information, then the user experience, the user interface, is not the most relevant part. I mean, it is. And that's the next point I wanted to get to, which is like, how do we define it in a user experience parameter, or do we understand it just plainly as something mimetic, or I mean, to each their own to some extent, but I think that the metaverse will do well to first define its baseline, and then second, remain focused on its purpose, because there are so many different applications. We had identified two like ends just to compare, right? Like you've got something that is a disciplined artifact of training for intentional training purposes. And then you've got something else, which is a spontaneous sort of formless entertainment. And there's, they're very different things, but they have a similarity, right? They have a common thread. The common thread is that they fit under the subheading of Metaverse. And whichever of those applications a platform is considering, that it's important to know that building the Metaverse is not an end unto itself, right? Building the Metaverse, just like building an institution, just like building a school, is not an end unto itself. That it's meant to be instrumental, right? It's meant to be instrumental. It's meant to be a medium. It's meant to be a means and not an end. And that it's meant to increase human freedom and well-being and happiness, success, right? And that if ever the technology makes our lives more difficult, if ever the technology makes our lives more complicated or creates problems, more problems than it's solving, different problems, you could laugh to say some of the biggest problems today were solutions from a decade ago. Don't let that be this. Don't let this be that. Don't let that. As to Eric's point, I agree with it completely. Right? Like a designer might get into a metaversal platform and think to themselves, how can I make this place exactly like a regular meeting? And to that, I'd say that you missed the point. Make it better. Make it different than a regular meeting. And transform it. To Stephen's point, I mean, the traditional public education system is meant for industry training of the second industrial revolution, not the fourth. Things move faster now. We need to keep up. And that's my comment for this round.
Awesome. Stephen.
Yeah, I love what Jason and Eric, well, what everybody's saying, but just to build off of what Jason was saying, we're living in the problems that were created by the social revolution of things like Facebook. Depression is higher than ever now. People are, suicide levels are up. We've got all these problems, and they can be directly tied to that revolution of this social media. And I think there's a misnomer. People assume that they're socializing through these platforms, and they're not, and that's causing problems. Really, what they're doing is they're being entertained by the platforms, spending their time in these platforms, and it's causing some problems. So I won't get too much into that, but I think finding a way to launch the metaverse that doesn't cause more problems is going to be key. One thing I think in education, Eric mentioned it, and David Shoemaker, you alluded to this, is passion. A passion for learning is got to be key. And we were blown away with when the pandemic started, and all these traditional schoolers who didn't have access to education all of a sudden were contacting us as leaders in the homeschooling community and saying, hey, how do we do this? I can't get my kid to learn. All they want to do is, go out, sit and play video games, and they won't actually learn. And we had to back it up and say, wait a minute, you're missing the point. The point is find what they're passionate about, like somehow connect to this passion, and that becomes the impetus for why you're actually learning in the first place. So whatever the metaverse becomes, it needs to have some aspect of this, at least in the educational space, that, I mean, you want to call it edutainment, or if you want to call it, the gamification of education, to connect people, but not just get them somehow connected to the platform so that they're entertained enough to participate, but that sparks some passion inside of them where they say, wait a minute, I didn't even know I was interested in this. And now I like David Shoemaker said, now I want to learn everything that I can about this. And then that becomes, they become an astronaut or they become an accountant. It doesn't matter. You know, they're passionate about it, and that's what makes it important that they learn this. And then I think the second challenge is the access to the content and access to technology. We're going to have to make sure that, you know, that the devices, the AR devices, what the VR goggles, that they come down in cost enough that everybody can have them so that everybody can engage in this. Otherwise, it's going to be like, oh, well, I've got to drive 20 minutes to my school because they actually have them in a lab, and then I can use them. It's got to be available to everybody. I think the top thing that somehow needs to be in this, and I have no idea how it will happen or if it can happen, I hope it does, is mistakes. We need to be able to make mistakes, because brain studies have shown that if you're successful, if you do a problem right, nothing happens to your brain. Absolutely nothing changes. When you make a mistake, your brain rewires itself every single time. So the way that we actually learn is by making mistakes. And so part of learning in the metaverse has to be, you made a mistake, you failed. Here's why you failed. And then your brain starts rewiring. It says, oh, okay, I'm going to get it. And this is part of the gamification of it, I guess, too, is that you're like, oh, I'm going to try it again. I'm going to try it again. I'm going to try it again. And every time you try it again, your brain rewires and you become better at it. You understand the problems more. You understand the solutions better. So those three things, and especially the mistakes aspect, I would love to see that somehow implemented, that people are able to make mistakes in the metaverse and learn from them.
Oh, what a great group of speakers we've had today. Somebody said they love Metaverse Mondays because they learn. Well, me too. This has been wonderful. We've gone over our hour mark, and Sharif isn't here to shut us off. And I know that we could probably keep going the rest of the day. I know that I could. But perhaps somebody does have a last minute remark they'd like to make. So I want to propose that we do a lightning round on the way out. Everybody take no more than a minute. A final thought if you have it. And when we get to the end, then we'll wave everybody goodbye and we'll see each other next time around. So David, you want to start us with our lightning round? We'll go in the same order we've gone. So as soon as you've gone, I'll go, and then Eric will go, and then Lisa, and then Jason, and then Stephen, and then we wave goodbye. It's over to you, David.
Best practices, education, and metaverse. Learning to be active, not passive. The app should be engaging rather than distracting, and not overly use technology, but use technology where appropriate. It should be something that's meaningful for the students. It should be something that the parents can be involved with the students, the teachers can be involved with the students. And finally, education in the metaverse should also encourage social interaction, both inside and outside the metaverse, not just playing solo. So David, lightning round.
All right, my lightning round. The metaverse is not just something new and exciting, which it is, but it's meant to make things better than it was before. That's what we've seen as we've moved historically through education delivery. Let's follow this wherever it logically takes us and make tomorrow better than today.
I think one of the big factors is this. Why are we here? I think it's for helping people find their passion. That's what I wish for people. Help them figure out how to get paid for it so they can live, and figure out how to share their gifts in their life with other people. So passion, pay, and people is the big thing. I think in doing that, I think we think of education as centers of excellence, which make sure we keep that ethical group of doing this right and not harming that is a key thing. So let's turn education into centers of excellence to help people find their passion, figure out how to get paid for it, and figure out how to share it with other people.
There's a lot of Twitter spaces lately with metaverse creators and communities. I was on one yesterday that was 9 hours long, full of information. Hardly noticed. And also Friday, same thing, 8 hours, I think. Most of them are 1 to 2, but you can come and go. I'm sharing them on Twitter at Lisa Chandler if you want to follow and watch and join and learn by experience. So with that, I'll move on.
And of course, I think I would say that captivating attention is first. It's primary. That okay. So there's learning is an unstoppable force, in that a person is always learning something. The mind is always curious. It's always gathering. Has learned what you want them to is a different question. So captivating their attention is primary, and that you earn that, right? There are ways to do that. It shouldn't be manipulative. That trust that their inner guidance will seek to attend to what is serving their best interest truly. And what is serving their best interest truly will earn their attention. You provide that to them, you show them the way out of their problems, and they'll keep coming back. So my last thoughts for today.
So everybody had such great points. I'm going to use my lightning round for something completely different and say yes, 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 yes. Like, these are all super points. These are all, it's a great discussion. So here's what I want to do. If you watch this, I want you to share it with at least one person, probably 3. You need to share it with probably even more than that. If you watch this, you probably know a home education center. You probably know some mainstream education people, private or public schools. You know some higher education people. You know some companies. You know some entrepreneurs who are interested in this space. Get this information out there. Every single point of view here, every single comment needs to be part of this metaverse with education. So spread the word on this. I think that's super important. These are all 5 of you are great leaders and great minds in this space, and your vision needs to get out. And I want to see a platform that's built, described exactly how we did it today. That's my comment.
Wow. Awesome show today. A great Metaverse Monday. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Let's all wave goodbye and go ahead and leave the studio, because I think that's the only way that we can shut this show down with Sharif not being here. So thank you, everybody, for coming.
Peace.